This is Rosen Institute's Your Law Firm, where Ned Days and Lee Rosen cover management, marketing, finance, and new technologies for building the practice you deserve. Rosen Institute members received this episode early, as well as exclusive segments on putting your list of things to do at the center of your life, and an answer to a member question about letting someone go in order to afford to hire someone else that would be better for the business. Get access to everything you're missing at roseninstitute.com/join. Here's Lee Rosen.
It's good to be with you today from Chennai, India. It's hard to be here and not think about the word privilege, a word that some people push back on. But here, you don't debate it. You just feel it. Because when you're in India, one thing becomes very clear very fast. You can leave. Most people here, they can't. That choice alone separates worlds. This place, it is overwhelming. It's an intense, non-stop assault on the senses in ways that I won't even try to describe. You really can't understand it until you've lived inside of it. And yes, I know the argument that opportunity, it's earned, that many of us started from nothing and built what we have. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Here in India, the obstacles, they are often crushing. I sit in the back seat of an air-conditioned taxi watching families living under tarps in crowded intersections, children with no school, no water, no safety, no exit. And then the taxi that I'm in, it pulls away and we're headed for a beautiful hotel, a great meal, a chandelier overhead. That contrast, it is exhausting, but it's also clarifying. Most of us, we aren't Elon Musk, but still, we have advantages that dwarf what most of the world will ever touch. And it's worth remembering that, especially when we're busy pouting about a bad month or a lost case or some temporary setback. Perspective, it matters.
It's time for your tech tip. Have you heard about this AI thing? Have I talked about that at all? I realize that I am maybe a little insufferable on the topic, so it may surprise you to learn that this year, like every other year, I'm getting ready to pay a CPA a few $100s to do my taxes. Now, I have, of course, dumped my entire financial life into a Claude project. I have asked it questions about depreciation schedules, or rather, it asked me questions about depreciation schedules since I didn't know what those were. It gives me great answers. I am confident that I could prepare a perfectly serviceable tax return. And yet every spring, or actually every October really, because I file for an extension, I gather my documents, I email them to my accountant, and I pay him his fee. The delta between doing it myself and paying someone else to put his or her name on it is small enough that I would rather have a human being that I can point a finger at if something goes sideways. The IRS does not care that ChatGPT told me that using the Augusta rule to rent my house to myself as a business expense for 14 days per year as some kind of tax dodge I heard about in a YouTube short is probably legal. They care that I got it wrong. And when I get it wrong, I want that to be somebody else's problem, or at the very least a problem that somebody else is professionally obligated to help me solve. I pay for the stamp of approval, the professional sign-off, the I can call this guy on the phone and he has to answer because he filed this insurance policy. And I sleep great. Am I a hypocrite? Obviously, but a well-rested hypocrite. I bring this up because the same tension, the AI can do this, but should I let it, is showing up all over the legal world right now. And I want to talk about a couple of tools that illustrate this spectrum. The first is a Chrome extension called Termsy. You can find it on the Chrome Web Store by searching TERMSY. It's a pretty simple concept. You install it in your browser, and as you visit websites and click on their privacy policies or terms of service, it automatically scans the language and highlights what it considers critical or problematic clauses and presents them in a sidebar so you can actually understand what you are agreeing to before you click I accept. Not life-changing, but interesting. You are presumably probably capable of reading the terms of service without a browser extension holding your hand, but I do think it is an interesting example of AI being put to genuinely functional use and bringing the nastiest issues front and center without needing to read 30 pages of terms, which is pretty handy. Termsy is essentially an AI doing a first-pass review of boilerplate legal language in real time and surfacing the stuff that's actually worth paying attention to. It is worth noting that you could accomplish exactly the same thing by copying and pasting any terms of service you come across into ChatGPT or Claude with a custom prompt to spot common issues. You would get similar analysis. Termsy just automates that workflow and tucks it into your browser where it runs in the background. The underlying technology isn't magic. It's the packaging and convenience that makes it a product. That is true of a lot of AI tools right now, and it's worth keeping in mind as you evaluate what is actually novel versus what is just a nice wrapper around something you could already do yourself with a little effort. Because even we, the tech-forward professionals we are, those on the bleeding edge, still find it useful and worth paying for something that makes our lives easy and gives us a little CYA assurance. Now, for the reverse of this, actually generating those terms and conditions and privacy policy, I find myself in the same position as I do with the CPA. Could I get Claude or Gemini to whip something up for me? Absolutely, but I hardly know where to start or what questions I need to be asking. I have used a service called Termageddon for years now. You can find it at termageddon.com. What they do is generate terms and conditions and privacy policies, cookie policies, disclaimers, EULAs, the whole suite of legal boilerplate that every website and application needs, but almost nobody maintains properly. You fill out a fairly detailed questionnaire about your business, where you operate, what data you collect, how you use it, what third-party services you integrate with, all that good stuff. Based on your answers, Termageddon generates your policies, and more critically, it gives you an embed code for your website rather than just a copy-paste of the static language, so it's always up to date. When a privacy law changes in a jurisdiction where you do business, they notify you, tell you what needs to be updated in your dossier, and your policies update accordingly. AI is incredible, but assuming that the policy you drafted with the free ChatGPT tier has the latest updates about privacy legislation in Connecticut or Illinois or wherever else it matters, or that it knows to search for what's changed since the training data is a stretch. And that brings me back to my CPA, because what we are really talking about here is what happens to professional services as AI gets better and better at the actual work product. AI can review terms of service. AI can draft policies. AI can analyze contracts and generate legal documents and do 100 other things that used to require a professional's time and attention. And it's only going to get better at all of it. But there's a difference between a tool that can do the work and a service that stands behind the work. There is a difference between a document that looks right and a document that someone is professionally obligated to keep right. And there is a difference between saving a few bucks by doing it yourself and paying to make it someone else's problem. That last one is the principle I use with my CPA, and I think it applies to a lot more than taxes. For your practice, this is worth thinking about on both sides. On the one hand, you should absolutely be exploring these tools. Termsy is a clever application of AI to a real problem. Termageddon is a well-built service to keep compliance manageable and affordable. On the other hand, you should also recognize that your clients are going to be asking the same questions about your services that I am asking about my taxes. AI can draft a contract. AI can review a lease. Why am I paying you? And the answer, I think, is the same one my CPA gives me when I joke about replacing him with a robot. You're paying me because if this is wrong, you want someone to call. And beyond that, as these documents themselves become effectively free, the value, the fee justification, the marketing momentum really hinges on knowing the questions to ask and on being creative about which documents and strategies are the ones worth pursuing. Trusting that someone will draft the right document and stand behind what's in it is a lot more valuable than being able to generate a lot of bad documents that don't actually do what I wanted because I didn't know what I needed. I'm Ned Days, and that's your tech tip. And now for your moment of concise advice. I speak to lawyers fairly regularly about marketing and which marketing channels or vehicles are best for their markets and practice areas. And I was speaking with a lawyer recently about billboards. Now, I have some nostalgic fondness for display advertising. I cut my teeth on billboards and bus placards and airport banners during and just out of college. And at Rosen Law Firm, we used billboards from time to time. It wasn't a huge success for us in that practice area and that location, but it's definitely worth a try in certain practice areas and certain geographic areas. It's something to consider. Now, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and I won't mention any names, but there are 2 or 3 law firms in the area that are very prolific with billboard advertising. They are hard to miss. I think most towns past a certain size have an accident or workers' comp or traffic attorney who is maybe the butt of a few jokes due to the extensive billboard or radio jingles or something else, but it works and it gets us talking about them. But this isn't about billboards or radio jingles. In this discussion about using billboards, the attorney suggested that the advertising package she was looking at would pay for itself very quickly. And she explained that she was going to spend, we'll call it about $10,000 per month to make the math easy. And she went on to tell me that her average initial retainer is about $20,000. And so she said one client from the billboards would more than pay for the advertising for the whole month. And that's not at all an uncommon proposal that I hear. Somebody explains the cost of the marketing product and they tell me that it's going to pay for itself very quickly. I hear about this when people are just diving into something like pay-per-click pretty regularly too. Oh, my average case value is $7,500. So if I spend $7,500 over the next 2 months and I get one client, I will break even. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that is not breaking even, and that is not even remotely any kind of return on investment. Spending $7,500 to acquire a $7,500 case is not breaking even. Spending $10,000 to acquire a $20,000 case is not breaking even. I'm not sure why it is, but it's shockingly common to believe that generating roughly the same amount of gross revenue from the marketing as the marketing costs will allow it to pay for itself. And this is something that is obviously not the case to us in almost any other context. If I tell you that you can save 2 cents per gallon at a gas station 3 hours away, it's pretty obvious that it's not worth your time and energy. You are going to use more gas getting there and back, and you've lost 6 hours of your time. It's easy to spot. And again, in any other scenario, you know that a $10,000 fee doesn't mean you see exactly $10,000 in your bank account the next month. There are credit card fees and bank fees, rent, utilities, software subscriptions, dues and licenses, insurance to be paid, and that's before we account for your time or your team's time and the payroll to actually do the work. But it is not at all infrequent that I hear things like, it's going to cost $10,000, but I'm sure I can generate $10,000, so I should do it, right? I can't lose. Well, what those lawyers are missing and what I'm getting at today is that the cost of the marketing is just the beginning of the cost of delivering a legal service. If you spend $10,000 on marketing, you have to generate a lot more revenue than $10,000 to pay for that marketing. We were billing on fixed fees, and an example of this came up when we had to refund clients immediately after they retained. This wasn't terribly uncommon. In family law, you sometimes have couples decide they are going to try to reconcile. They want to hold off on moving forward. That's totally normal. But we had a fee straight off the top, even if they retained that morning and by that afternoon had patched things up. We had a fee of a couple of $100s that we kept even if we refunded the rest. And it's not that we were just trying to be mean about it. Once someone retained, a lot of wheels were set in motion that required the time and energy of several employees and resources of the firm. And that was money that we just couldn't get back, no matter how few hours actually went into the process. So what kind of multiple should you be looking for? I tend to look at the break-even point on marketing as being 7.5 times the cost of the marketing. So if I spend $10,000 on marketing, I need to generate $75,000 in revenue because I need to take that $75,000 and spend $10,000 of it on the marketing that I just purchased, and then I need to pay for the payroll and the other overhead and generate some profit from that undertaking. You have a whole bunch of expenses that need to be paid out of that $75,000. So you can't afford to only pay for the marketing. You have to pay for all of the other expenses that are associated with doing the legal work. And the truth is, I think 7.5 times is really the bare minimum. That is kind of the break-even point to a large degree. We've done marketing over the years that generated 50 times the cost of the marketing, and I think lots of law firms do that with some regularity. I don't think that's a particularly unusual thing. Certainly, if you build a professional network, you are going to find that the 50 times return on investment becomes normal and kind of expected. You get an incredibly high return on investment from building your professional network. So don't allow yourself to get sucked into this bad idea that the break-even point on marketing is just covering the cost of the marketing. That is something that certainly people who sell advertising or sell billboards or whatever it may be want you to believe. They will tell you that if you cover your costs, then you are making money on everything on top of that, but you aren't. Now, what I don't want to do is discourage you from trying different marketing channels and experimenting. And I also don't want to encourage you to give up too quickly. If you've done a lot of paid advertising over the years, be it local media, pay-per-click, whatever, you are aware that these can take a while to show up in terms of new clients, and there's often some tweaking and adjustment that needs to happen to dial things in. It is not uncommon to have a minimum number of months on an initial contract when you are working with a pay-per-click professional, not just because they are trying to lock you in, but because there is some experimentation that needs to happen to get things performing well in a particular location or practice area. What I do want you to come away with is a more realistic assessment of what kind of returns you need to be expecting on your marketing over a reasonable period of time, so that you know that going in when you're making the purchasing decision on whatever marketing vehicle it happens to be. We aren't going to expect something to deliver more clients than we can handle the very next day, but we also need to be aware that if you have arrived at a level of $30,000 in fees for every $10,000 you spend after 6 months of doing this, and you consider that a success and stick with it, that's a very easy way to bleed your practice to death without necessarily realizing what's happening. So it's very important that you have a reliable and accurate way to measure performance. You can't tell if you are getting that 7.5 times return if you have no idea how many clients are coming in off of that particular marketing vehicle. And it's also a good excuse to figure out an accurate assessment of what it costs to get work done in your practice, what the actual cost is for a case of a particular value, and how that cost may change depending on the case type or the case value. Sometimes the difference in work required between a $5,000 case and a $40,000 case is negligible, but sometimes it's huge. And I'm not going to tell you that the 7.5x metric is some mathematically inviolable truth. It's a useful heuristic arrived at by real-world experience and tracking what it actually costs to complete a case, at least in our circumstance. It's a good starting point, but it's going to be a lot more useful for you to get a handle on the ins and outs of what representation costs you versus what you are charging for it. You need to look at payroll costs, insurance, rent, software licenses, everything else, and get a reasonable estimate for your practice. Maybe your overhead is dramatically different. Know that, don't assume it. It is with alarming frequency that I talk to lawyers who have built up a practice. They have hired associates and staff. They are generating way more revenue. They've opened up new locations, and they are taking home less than they were 5 years ago without all of those outward signifiers of a thriving firm. Now, it would be one thing if you were deciding to take home less for yourself and put this incredible amount of extra revenue and then some into ambitious growth plans, but that's not what's happening in these cases. There are more mouths to feed and the business is growing, but what's happening is that an unprofitable model is being scaled up and you are the one taking the haircut. I often see this as more of a problem in slightly larger and by appearances more successful firms. If there is enough money sloshing around and the bank balance isn't tipping into the red, it's easier to ignore the fundamentals. It's easy to set up a compensation structure that you feel makes you competitive by making it inelastic to how much business you actually have coming in. And it's easy to set fees and rates because that's what your competitors charge or that's what you charged at your old firm or whatever else the rationale is. And this can chug along for a while until something easily identifiable happens and there is an obvious downturn, or something like a small blip turns into a disaster 3 months later where you have to lay off staff or try reducing their compensation, which never goes well. So don't believe yourself or anybody else on the idea that simply covering the cost of the marketing is breaking even. It's not even close. That's your moment of concise advice.
Thanks for spending a few minutes with me and Ned today. We hope you have a great weekend and an even better week next week. Keep plugging away, moving forward, and getting things done. You're on the right track. You'll get there. I promise. We're all in this together, and together we build better practices through better marketing, better management, and better technology. Until next time, I'm Lee Rosen.
Thanks for listening to Your Law Firm. Subscribe to the Friday File at roseninstitute.com and join thousands of other lawyers who are working on instead of in their businesses. You'll find safe, successful, actionable approaches for transforming your practice. Join us today at roseninstitute.com.